Good afternoon. It's Friday the 17th of, no it's not, it's Thursday the 17th of January. We're having a very good day today. Welcome to UK Column Live. I'm your host this afternoon, Brian Gerrish, and with me in the studio I've got Clive de Carle. Hello Clive, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Brian.
Clive's going to be talking later about health and good diet and foods and sources of foods. So we'll come into that in due course. We've also got Patrick Henningsen joining us. Patrick is still in Beirut and he will be coming in live on Skype, giving us an update on not only what's happening in Beirut and the Lebanon, but also what the word is about the situation in Syria. Can you hear me okay, Patrick?
Yeah, loud and clear, Brian. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Okay, so that's a sigh of relief. Well, before we start with the news items, I'll just say that the weather here in Plymouth is pretty chilly. It's about 0 degrees. Yesterday was quite interesting driving up to London because there were pockets of cold down to -2, -3 degrees with some very spectacular frosts. So it does look as though UK is coming into a bit of a cold spell. The weather today here in Plymouth is chilly and overcast and not a lot of wind. But we're quite warm in the studio, so that's good. Okay, well, the first story we picked up on is from The Independent, which is a little article saying that universities should be wooing primary school children. And we thought we'd just bring this to your attention because on one hand it sounds quite reasonable that the universities think that more children should be coming into their catchment. But if we think it through a little bit more, we've got the situation at the moment where thousands of young people are being drawn into debt by having to pay for their university courses, and of course they can't even start to pay that debt off until they've got a job. And we know at the moment there's a massive problem in UK with employment, particularly amongst young people, and there's increasing criticism of the types of university degrees being offered that are not giving children the life skills. But here are the universities now basically, can we say, pushing propaganda to get them involved. You look poised with a microphone, Mike, no? Well, we just say to people, please have a look at the story. The man mentioned is Presser Les Ebdon, Director of the Office for Fair Access. He's a very interesting man because he's an out-and-out scientific specialist. Microchemistry, I think, is his key thing. But this man is now coming to the fore saying that we should be getting in amongst younger children and encouraging them to go to university. So we'll leave you to make your minds up about that, but we're a little bit suspicious. If we move on, we must mention, of course, the leader of the United Kingdom, David Cameron. And there are many papers at the moment reporting his efforts to speak out on whether we should or shouldn't be in the European Union. I personally find it very interesting that it's taking Mr. Cameron to go to Holland to tell the British people what he thinks about the European Union. Whether that's an insult or it's some part of the European agenda, I don't know. But of course, we are steadily seeing that more and more people are asking the key question as to how Britain can remain in an organisation where we have these massive financial problems. Any thoughts on that, Patrick? I expect we've lost you now, have we?
Yeah, I'm here, Brian. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yeah. Have you got any thoughts on Mr. Cameron and his commentary on the European Union and whether we should have a referendum or not?
Well, I think one of the big issues is going to be as well the European legislation. As you discussed on your program last week, there's a number of laws, including sort of extradition laws within Europe, and also sharing data across borders. So my thoughts have always been the same, and I'll stick to my line regarding the political posturing on Europe, which is that it's used as a political football in the present term, and in the long term, the country has, we are moving towards a European super state. That is the trend. that's been visible over the last few decades, and it's continued to move forward. I think just for short-term electioneering and in order to keep the press busy, watching the ping pong ball go back and forth, they flip-flop on Europe and so forth. But if there was really going to be a referendum, it would have happened already, Brian.
Yeah, well, they're playing a game, aren't they? I'll just pick up on this. I'm just going to come to you, Clive, and see whether you might like to comment on this story. But I'll just pick up from this article, from the article we showed the picture with Cameron there in front of the European Council background. But he was saying, he's talking about the Dutch. You were voting as we would have done against a Brussels system that had become meddlesome, arrogant, and remote. And what intrigues me, of course, is the last thing I think you can do is describe the European Union as meddlesome, arrogant and remote. What we should really be talking about is criminal, fraudulent, incompetent and dangerous. So for me, the moment this debate is put in the public domain, there's meddling around with the language as if the European Union is some sort of benign trading bloc, which of course it isn't. Clive, what's your thoughts on Europe? Can you comment? Codex, for example.
Well, it's frightening what's happening in Europe from the perspective of health, because, as probably most people know, it's been on the news that if a water manufacturer were to make the bold and audacious claim that water hydrated you, that they could go to prison for 2 years for saying such a thing, because it's never been proved, double-blind, to the satisfaction of Europe. Yeah.
So we could put this, on one hand, we could put this down to a little bit of bureaucracy and red tape and political speak. That's one thing. Or we could say that actually there's something fairly serious going on here in the way that even water can be controlled instead of freely available. Yeah. Well, we've got, we'll just move on here, another Mail article, but of course on the subject of Europe, we're now seeing that supposedly key people in the city are speaking out and saying that leaving Europe is going to be bad for British businesses. So a lot of fear-mongering starting to come in. That Britain can't possibly move away from Europe because we absolutely won't survive in the world. And there's never, to my mind, any comment from the British public, but usually we're seeing these key figures. I'm just going to show you some key figures. I haven't pulled out their names, but we can see, well, we've got the Chief Executive of the British Chamber of Commerce, but we've got these people who are supposedly advising us on what we should and we shouldn't do. The BBC is involved as well in the surveys as to what British people think, but we're not being told the real truth about the state of the European Union, whether that's on a financial, economic or job basis. So it does appear that Mr Cameron, Miliband and Clegg are up to some form of smokescreen. I have a picture here of Mr Clegg from the Telegraph. He seems to be just stirring really by commenting on the fact that any politician that thinks they should have a pay rise is potty. I think the average salary for a politician is around about £68,000 a year, which would be nice for some of us. Of course, Mr Clegg's in a totally different category altogether. I think heading towards the millionaire status if he's not already there. So presumably it's okay for him to tell his colleagues what they should or shouldn't earn. Maybe hypocrisy. The Independent got an interesting story where we've had 2 police officers and a journalist have been arrested. This is all to do with News Corporation and people passing information around. And one of the points that UK Column Live has made over the last couple of weeks is that we are seeing police officers arrested, but we are not seeing any movement towards people in political power being brought into a court to answer for their part in anything from the phone hacking to the exchange of information. And we wonder whether this focus on the police is in order to further undermine the the status of the police force. Of course, we've also been reducing salaries for young police officers, and many police men and women have contacted us to say that they're absolutely appalled that a job, and obviously we fully admit the risks and the stress of training to be a police officer and doing the job on the streets. The government's reward is to cut salaries. So the police seeming to come under the hammer at the moment from the establishment. Meanwhile, we are not seeing politicians arrested on any scale for their part in anything from expense fiddling to wars overseas. But we'll see what comes up in due course. John Henley here from The Guardian, Mike. I think this is a gentleman you've pulled out of the pot.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure we got his face on screen here. If you show the next slide, this is really what this is about. We missed this story last week, so we'll go through it now. Basically, he published this on the 3rd in The Guardian, so you must assume that The Guardian, from an editorial standpoint, had no particular problem with what this gentleman was writing. But he's written this article, Paedophilia Bringing Dark Desires to Light. And he starts off by saying, the Jimmy Savile scandal caused public revulsion, but experts disagree about what causes paedophilia and even how much harm it causes. And he begins by acting as the apologist for the whole National Council on Civil Liberties, now called Liberty. We've talked about this several times. Harriet Harman's involvement with attempting to liberalise the law with regard to taking photographs of children and sexual photographs of children. And so this guy starts off by apologising for what happened then, or acting the apologist for it. And then goes on to really say it's difficult today, after the public firestorm unleashed by the revelations about Jimmy Savile and the host of child abuse allegations they have triggered, to imagine any mainstream group making anything like such a claim. But if it is shocking to realise how dramatically attitudes to paedophilia have changed in just 3 decades, it is even more surprising to discover how little agreement there is between, even among those who are considered experts on the subject. And he goes on to discuss how various so-called experts can't agree on whether paedophilia does any harm, and he's really pushing the idea that that so long as it's entered into voluntarily, that there's no problem with it. It's a fairly horrible article, and really you have got to wonder why The Guardian is publishing it.
Well, I would say the
rhetorical question.
Yeah, well, of course, I'd say The Guardian is publishing it because what we're starting to do is blur the boundaries, and we're getting slowly beginning to put the idea into people's heads that paedophilia is acceptable and normal. We have had people from children's services telling us strange stories about individuals giving talks to social services groups, where privately they admitted that maybe in a few years, 50 years, paedophilia will be normal and accepted part of society. And certainly we think that there's evidence at the moment this is where the government's trying to take us.
Well, in the article, he's really attempting to distinguish between what he's calling child abusers, people that abuse children sexually but with violence, and what he's calling, in inverted commas, real paedophiles. And so he's trying to blur, or at least distinguish, trying to say that a certain group of people are in some way justifiable, as opposed to those who just abuse children. And personally, I don't see the difference.
No, but this is a totally common tactic, isn't it? We're blurring the debate here, getting people to think, well, yes, perhaps that's right, as to whether we come back to a more forceful right or wrong. And in the meantime, of course, we're still seeing almost no substance coming out about the Jimmy Savile scandal, and we're certainly not seeing any police investigation or movement towards abusers in the higher positions of power and the establishment. Patrick, I'm sure you've got some thoughts on this subject.
Yeah, this comes on the back of the recent news that there was a move in Parliament to discuss lowering the age of consent, and the Prime Minister rightly backpedaled on this motion. And my question I posed on my website last week was, what is this obsession that politicians have with lowering the age of consent all of a sudden? I find it very odd, with all the things going on in society, within Europe and within the world, why it's so important for our elected politicians and media consensus makers to be obsessing with lowering the age of consent. I just can't for the life of me figure out why. Obviously, you're going to probably give me some answers on this, but this journalist who's written this article for The Guardian, we have a number of these professional journalists who are called consensus makers, and they're often drafted in to do very specific jobs. And at least in America, during the Franklin cover-up, Boys Town cover-up, you had journalists who were actually involved in some of these crimes, who were corrupted along with judges and police and politicians. But they're called opinion makers, and they'll often float talking points, as this Guardian writer has done, to make it seem plausible within an argument that there's some sort of existing consensus, when in fact there is no such thing and it doesn't exist. But obviously, as Joseph Goebbels taught us back in those days of the Nazi days, that propaganda is a fine art, and you must cultivate talking points over and over until such a time where the chattering classes on the street and the liberal chattering classes are talking like it's a matter of fact. And this is what our spin doctors get up to a great degree, especially in Westminster and especially in Washington, D.C. They're spinning constantly. And so is the media complicit in some of this opinion making.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Patrick. Of course, we can remind viewers and listeners that the Guardian was a major player in helping to set up the Leveson inquiry. The organisation actually doing the pushing behind the scenes is the Scott Trust, which is the ownership of the Guardian. So we have a paper that sits there and tries to make out their reporting in an independent and free way. Meanwhile, their guardians are working behind the scenes to actually fund and to promote and to help stir up the environment to get this massive investigation into the press, and ultimately Leveson pushing for greater control. It also hasn't escaped me that it was the Guardian that was busily gently warming the British people to the idea that we were going to be tied up in a relationship with the French for defence, and it's been the Guardian that's consistently taken the lead on stories to do with the demise of Britain's nuclear deterrent. Of course, many people would say that the Guardian is just a spokes piece for the government, and we are continually hearing from people that there seems to be this drive towards making it acceptable to be having a relationship or sex with children. And of course the fact that we have MPs in power at the moment who've actively campaigned for this, Harriet Harman being one of them, people have got very short memories, and also I don't think they really understand the type of agenda some of these politicians are pushing. But we're going to keep focused on this, and if we see any more movement in this direction, UK Column Live will be covering it. So from that rather unsavoury subject, we move over to Obama, impeach Obama, which I think you've called up for us, Mike.
Right, well, before we talk about Syria and Mali, I just wanted to cover this. The Impeach Obama campaign has been running for quite some time. This is their website, and but more and more people are starting to get involved and back it up. So yesterday we had Representative Trey Riddell. So this is Political Wire talking about Trey Riddell backing up the earlier calls for impeachment from Representative Steve Stockman. And although this might be controversial for some of our viewers and listeners, Alex Jones has also is also starting to push the impeachment agenda. So hopefully there's going to be some kind of popular backing for this. But I just wanted to read some of the articles of impeachment against Obama that Alex Jones has filed, and he's basically backing up these two congressmen. And you know, no matter what you think of Alex Jones, this is probably the right thing to do, and perhaps we should be doing a similar thing in this country with one or two of our party leaders. But anyway, he starts off his article by quoting the Declaration of Independence, and as you would imagine, his first complaint about Obama is with regard to the Second Amendment, but he then goes on to say Obama has aided America's enemies, violating his oath by sending funds to insurgents in Syria who are being commanded by al-Qaeda terrorists. He says Obama has violated federal law by overseeing a cover-up surrounding Operation Fast and Furious, the transfer of guns to Mexican drug cartels direct from the federal government. He said Obama has lied to the American people by overseeing the cover-up of the Benghazi attack, which directly led to the deaths of 4 American citizens. The cover-up has been called Obama's Watergate, yet 4 months after the incident, no one in the administration has been held accountable. He said Obama has brazenly undermined the power of the Congress by insisting his authority came from the United Nations Security Council prior to the attack on Libya, and that congressional approval was not necessary. He said that Obama has signed into law the National Defense Authorization Act, which includes provisions that permit the abduction and military detention without trial of U.S. citizens violating habeas corpus. And he said he has enacted universal health care mandates that force Americans to buy health insurance, a clear violation of the Constitution and exceeding congressional power to regulate interstate commerce. And he's got a number of other lesser points as well. So, you know, the question is, where is this push to? I mean, there's clear recognition within various areas within the American establishment that Obama needs to go. And as I was saying to you earlier, up until maybe 6 or 8 months ago, you know, the Black Caucus in the House of Representatives was very pro-Obama because this is the first black president, so they clearly backed him from his first day in the presidency. But even the Black Caucus now is starting to recognize that Obama is not behaving like as they would have expected, and they find him somewhat disappointing. I think that's a bit of an understatement. And so there's a bit of a change in the mood within the Black Caucus in the House. So Obama seems to be getting a lot of pressure built up against him at the moment. And I'm hoping Patrick actually has a view on this.
Yeah, Mike. You know, there's been grounds to impeach Barack Obama from his first day in office. I did a little bit of an investigation last spring, and I went to visit Sheriff Joe Arpaio in Phoenix, Arizona, and met his investigative cold case posse team. And I saw for myself what I determined to be physical evidence that shows that there's forgery involved in both the president's birth certificate and his selective service draft card. And also, you tie this into the fact that this president, his first executive order he signed after he was allegedly sworn into office in January 2009, was a presidential records executive order to have all his personal records sealed by executive order. And also, spent $4.5 million in legal fees. Possibly the state picked the bill up on that to make that legally binding. So, I've had this issue from day one. But I've also seen in my lifetime, President Clinton, who was doing things that really embarrassed the country in the Oval Office under the desk, and they weren't able to impeach him. And it'll be even harder now because America is so divided. It's a superficial divide, but they're divided along Democrats and Republicans, and it's gone beyond politics in America. It's turned into a tribal thing. So people identify almost like football teams. So the Democrats are Chelsea with their blue stripe, and the Republicans are Man United with their red stripe. And it's that level of passionate commitment to your stripe. Regardless of what crimes and what evidence is presented against them. There's more than ample grounds to impeach George Bush, over a course of 8 years, but the political will wasn't there, and I don't think it's going to be there. The one thing that could impeach Obama would be Benghazi Gate, and for the simple fact that federal agencies and high-ranking members of Congress, probably under the orders of the White House, sat on not only Benghazi Gate information, but the connection with General Petraeus, who was head of the CIA at the time, having this extramarital affair with a deep covert operative, Paula Broadwell. That was sat on during the election, and it was known for weeks, if not months, and was not even whispered. And of course, that would have changed the outcome of the election. It would have swung the victory into the favor of Mitt Romney. So there's so many things. This president has nothing on his CV that would qualify him to hold the executive office in the United States, yet he was put forward and he was elected. The same goes true with George Bush Jr. in 2000, a very similar CV, although Bush did, I believe, at least complete one term as governor of Texas, where Obama didn't even complete his term in the Senate. So he's underqualified. His credentials as a U.S. citizen are debatable, as are his loyalties to the U.S. Constitution.
Yeah, Patrick, for perhaps for viewers and listeners who don't, let's say they haven't paid a lot of attention really to what's going on in America, any detail, they hear the mainstream news talking about Obama and America. How would you sum up what's really happened in America under the Obama regime? What is it that Alex Jones and hundreds of thousands, millions of other people in America are slowly beginning to, well, Alex is fully awake, but people are slowly beginning to wake up to the fact that something's changed in America. How would you sum up what's going on in America and why people should be concerned about what Obama's doing?
I think in summation, and I've had the good fortune, but not good fortune in looking at this, but the good fortune in having a perspective on it, where I've been in and out. I've been in the United States last year and also during the election year, and have been in Europe looking at it from a distance, and now obviously in the Middle East looking at U.S. foreign policy. The biggest danger with this president at this time in history, there's a lot of things that he has exacerbated. One of them is polarity, and that's a polarity dividing the country. Never has there been a greater gap in wealth in the United States. Never has there been a greater gap in those who have trust in the government, those who are loyal, who are working for the state, and the many more people who don't have any vested interest in the state apparatus as far as their career goes. And so there's an incredible amount of patronage. And if you look at where Obama comes from, the city of Chicago, and you look at people like Mayor Daley and Mayor for Life, and buying patronage, in other words, giving out jobs, giving out stimulus in order to buy loyalty. This Chicago system has been enacted on a kind of nationwide basis, and also there's a feeling that the United States, people always made fun of the U.S. that it was a young country and its history is only a few hundred years old. Well, the U.S. is moving forward in history, and it's becoming now, it's going into what looks like to me a European phase, whereby the level of entitlements and the level of state intervention into sort of day-to-day lives is increasing, much like it is how it is in Europe. And also, so it's a shift. America's going through a shift right now. America could implode economically. It's definitely bankrupt on paper, and it's amazing to me that 24/7, the last week or two, the headlines, the TV programs, everything's been dominated with this gun control thing, when in fact the U.S. is going into receivership right now. And I would think that would be a much bigger issue to be looking at. And so it's a big distraction. And again, nothing will come of this gun debate. There might be some minuscule legislation passed about how many clips are allowed in semi-automatic rifle and universal background checks, which are basically already in place anyway. But I think Obama has come, and he is the great divider. He has arrived onto the political scene. He is a oracle which other people speak through, and I'm talking mainly about the central banking conglomerate that actually runs the United States and the European partner in banking that runs the world. So Obama is a mouthpiece for these interests, always has been, and definitely he is a collectivist. And those who have put him in power are fascist collectivists. And if you look at the rhetoric from day one, it is all about the state being your new god and the state providing for you. And you find Obama supporters are very much in love with the state. No matter what crimes their leaders commit, no matter how many drone strikes are going through Pakistan, absolute carnage along the borders in Afghanistan and Pakistan, mostly civilians and other places around the world. And here they are arguing about, gun laws in America. I find it ridiculous when this is a federal government that kills with impunity on executive order. And this is a federal government that flooded the black market with illegal firearms along the Arizona-Mexican border and elsewhere, and whose actions in that respect, which have been backed by Janet Napolitano, Eric Holder, the Attorney General, definitely Obama had knowledge, have caused the deaths of U.S. Border Patrol agents, customs agents, hardworking, loyal people, government employees, and innocent citizens have died because of the federal government flooding the black market with illegally purchased firearms, in most cases where the purchases were flagged and the FBI came in and forced the gun shops to sell them to the straw purchasers. And they have to answer for this before this so-called Sandy Hook child massacre debate can even happen. And it's amazing to me that, of course, most people who support this the state worshipers, they don't want to have anything to do with looking at Fast and Furious or anything like that, or drone strikes around the world. A total just mowing down women and children in Pakistan and places like that. It's just unbelievable to me. There is so really, it seems like we've lost our moral compass in such a dramatic way. It's beyond words.
Okay, Patrick. Well, I think I'll just add to the information you put across there that Alex Jones has certainly been very outspoken for many years now on what's been happening in America and the change in American society, and the fact that the American government is becoming ever more draconian, stop and search, troops on the streets, powers which in any form of emergency they can control anything and everything from transport to food supplies to requisitioning anything that you own. And Alex Jones has been very outspoken in doing that, and I think it's absolutely clear now that a large number of people are paying attention to what he's talking about. So I'm going to say I think Alex has been doing a particularly good job in alerting people. Of course, he's got his own unique style, and he doesn't shy away from saying what he thinks. But at the end of the day, is he getting the message across, wake up, there's something nasty happening in America? I think he absolutely is. And I think he was absolutely right to take on Piers Morgan. I understand there's a new video clip circulating at the moment with Piers Morgan basically throwing papers across the desk, toys out of his pram, because he's not winning his argument over gun control. Who is this man and why has he been put in America? This is what I'd like to know. Mike, you're hovering there, I think.
Right, well, we'll just move on because, one of the points that Alex Jones was making was how close President Obama is to Al-Qaeda. And this is an article from yesterday in Eyewitness News talking about Obama meeting Prince Mohammed, Saudi prince. We talked a couple of days ago about Prince Bandar in Saudi Arabia basically running the Syrian rebels, and I was hoping to get some comment from about this. So Obama is in bed with Saudi royals, the and the Saudi intelligence agencies are running the Al-Qaeda-led opposition in Syria, and I wanted Patrick to comment on that, if we would.
Sure, and I just wanted to add one quick thing to the very quickly, and I'll move on to the Piers Morgan phenomenon. There's another British plant in the U.S. media who is also ascended to the highest level. His name is Martin Bashir. And he's spent on MSNBC, is basically spending a 24-hour cycle pushing the gun control issue as well. And I just thought I'd remind you guys of that. And you can look at Martin Bashir's career and make of that of what you will. But moving on swiftly, and regarding Syria, yes, this was a great point that Mike brought up on the UK Column show last I believe a few days ago, about Saudi and Saudi intelligence wanting to basically bring together by force or by threat a lot of the different warring Syrian opposition factions, and this includes all the various Al-Qaeda and foreign fighter splinter guerrilla groups and so forth. Now, this is really, you're looking at the next move. This is what I would call Plan C. Plan B was the chemical, was really to get a UN intervention or secure possible Security Council resolution based on the existence or Assad using chemical weapons. And that was a failure. I said that on your show last week. And lo and behold, only yesterday, there was a secret cable. You have a lot of these secret cables coming out of various U.S. consulates. One of them was out of the Istanbul General Council, and basically this was basically interviews from activists, defectors, and doctors insinuating that Assad had been using chemical weapons in the attack that occurred right before Christmas on December 23rd. Okay, now the U.S. is backpedaling on that claim, saying that they misinterpreted this information, which came from a third party, and no, Assad, we don't believe that he used chemical weapons on his own people. It's a very familiar narrative that we're all familiar with. Now, this is when it gets really interesting, but they've qualified their denial now with a very interesting statement, which is that Assad will be held accountable if he, in the future, uses or fails to secure his chemical weapons stocks. Okay, so you can see the Hegelian kind of controlled dialectic coming in here. So through their statement, they backpedaled on the incident before Christmas, the WMD chemical weapons incident, but they've set the language for the future, which is that they almost made it certain that he does have chemical weapon stocks by this statement, and that if he fails to secure them, so in other words, if these magically fall into the hands of Syrian Saudi-backed rebels, that it will provide them with justification for Security Council resolution or a unilateral intervention in Syria. So they've set that one up, that kind of Trojan horse, the chemical weapons thing. So that's ready to go. The button can be pushed at any time on that. And then secondly, we have this phenomenon with regards to the Washington and London. They're desperate to find an opposition group that they can deal with, because they've had to backpedal a bit on the opposition as a whole, and now they're saying we need someone to emerge. And obviously Mike has provided us with that answer, which is everyone coming under the al-Nusra rebellion front in Syria, and that's would be funded by Saudi Arabia. So again, you will look for this possible to emerge, the al-Nusra group. And this will be the one that London and Washington will prefer to do business with. So again, very, very disturbing. And you know, the more time you spend in this country and see the damage that has been done. I just had a conversation with the Guardian's most senior correspondent in the Middle East yesterday, who's a brilliant author. His name is David Hurst. Veteran journalist, fantastic, probably one of the most knowledgeable people on this region in the business. And he said that he believes that Syria is now going to play the role which Lebanon played over the last 30 years, which Syria, it's shifting, the battle pitch is shifting east, and it will be Syria and perhaps a reigniting of Iraq in the short term. So in a way that Lebanese could breathe a slight sigh of relief, but it's not altogether good news for the region. Right.
Just as a couple of lines, what feedback is coming across the border from Syria at the moment? We're not getting a huge amount of reports on fighting or activity there. What are you picking up on the ground?
I'm getting a lot of chatter regarding Jordan, which is really interesting. Not least of all because Jordan is, well, for the last 10 years, has been stepping up its joint military exercises in partnership with Great Britain, and there is a big contingent of British soldiers in Jordan right now. But Jordan's got Jordan is involved in Syria in one way or another. And also Jordan's a monarchy, and it's one of the last sort of monarchies in this cluster of states, and they have a king, and royal family, and so forth, constitutional monarchy. But the divisions, the socioeconomic divisions in Jordan are massive, as there's a massive Palestinian population, which forms a good, almost possibly even some would say a majority in some parts of Jordan. So if destabilization occurs in Syria and the regime collapses, Jordan could flare up in the future. And also, obviously, Jordan shares a border with Lebanon as well. But you know, the worst thing that Lebanon would have to endure is the influx of refugees from Syria. I visited 2 Palestinian refugee camps on the weekend. I was 16 kilometers from the Israeli border, just off the side of the city of Tyre. We had to pass through UN peacekeeper checkpoints and so forth. But you see the scale of the Palestinian refugee camps. Some of them house up to 100,000 people in not a very large space. And these are not tent refugee camps. These were originally tent camps that have been built up and provided, you know, they built their own houses, whatever, no planning permission or whatever. It's just a ramshackle of a section of a city. But they're still there after, you know, since 1948, 5 generations of refugee camps. Now we have 300,000, or not 300,000, estimates between 100 and 150,000 Syrian refugees in Lebanon. And again, hopefully they would be able to return to their country regardless of what the outcome is. But there's always that danger. And, you know, so again, you know, the theme here is, Brian, we have outside forces who are coming in with money, with arms, with fighters, with some new ideology to reshape a country, and the knock-on effects are disastrous, not only for the countries in question, but the neighboring countries. So this started in earnest with the formation of the State of Israel, which was a European implant into the region, and history has just kind of carried on from there, and it's just one thing after another. Yeah. So are we ever going to see the end of it? And if we are, you know, to what end is going to be? It's a very, very worrying questions that are up in the air right now.
Yeah, okay, well, certainly for me, I find it a frightening scenario that we have people like David Cameron and William Hague and Miliband and the rest of the crowd that can't manage UK with any form of order or efficiency, so they can't run their own country, but they're very happy to step on the international stage and tell other countries how they're going to conduct their affairs. And of course, we're now seeing a spillover into Mali at the moment, and
Well, the main part of this article is one of the other charges against Obama was that he was accepting the word of the UN Security Council in order to go to war instead of the Congress. And of course, in this article, this is from the Washington Post, it says, Panetta confident that US will clear legal hurdles to helping France and Mali. So, you know, we have this situation where the whole of Northern Africa, Northwest Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa is systematically being blown apart, not just in the Middle East, but right across towards the west coast of Africa now. And the French have obviously gone in. The British are providing logistical support. It sounds like at the very least America is going to also provide logistical support. They're importing troops from neighbouring countries in order to solve this problem. But of course, all that this is going to do is incite tribal tensions and cause, you know, a general breakdown in the region, I believe. So that was what that was about. But then, of course, yesterday we had the news of the Algerian hostage crisis. Now, I believe today that these people have actually escaped. The latest reports just before we came on air were that they had managed to get away. But nonetheless, we see the same, these Al-Qaeda-linked terrorists that were armed by the West, by Britain, France and the United States during the Libya conflict, are now running riot in countries to the south and east of Libya, and an incredible situation.
So we've got a map here which might just be useful for people. Credit where it's due. I think this has come out of the Mail. Apologies if it's another paper. Yeah,
I meant to say south and west of Libya, of course.
Yeah, okay. But of course, this is the main area that we've got the hostages there in Algeria and Mali down to the southwest. But the key thing that we're seeing is destabilisation. And of course, William Hague initially saying, well, we're providing a bit of assistance. But actually, we've been hammering The Guardian a bit, but we'll take a bit of their reporting here because they've got a nice little picture of the fact that we've now got armour moving into Mali, and we're seeing a spread of the trouble.
Well, one of the points that EIR made in the States was that that the people involved in this Algerian kidnapping were being led by a guy called Mokhtar Belmokhtar, and according to the Library of Congress Federal Research Division report on Al-Qaeda in Libya, this is from the Libyan conflict, they're highlighting that the head of the rebels in Libya, the Al-Qaeda related rebels in Libya, was this very gentleman. So he's still at large, still peddling his wares with and you know, bringing about these kind of events, destabilizing that region. And these people are absolutely linked to Obama. William Hague and David Cameron are supporting them as well. We are supporting terrorists, and that's the key concern, I think, that I'm trying to raise here.
Yeah, absolutely. I've just got one more picture which is talking about the kidnappers there, and I just wanted to bring up this statement from William Hague. I find William Hague a fascinating man. Really, he's done nothing for Britain, but now he's on the world stage, and here is his comment. It's absolutely unacceptable, of course. He's talking about what's going on in both Mali and Algeria. It is, in this case, the cold-blooded murder of people going about their business. So there's no excuse whether it's connected to Libya, Mali, or anywhere else. And this is a man, part of a machinery of the Lib-Lab Con, they're all involved in it, who have been murdering people in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, and now Syria. And the sheer hypocrisy of this particular gentleman, I think, deserves a medal. Perhaps we'll put him forward for one.
Well, we need to start an impeachment campaign for some of the leadership in this country, I believe.
Yeah, and we say that quite seriously. If there's any viewers or listeners who'd like to help take a lead on that, we'd be delighted for that to occur. Patrick.
Hey, Brian, can I interject on Mali?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, it's great points that Mike has brought up, and I think you guys have touched on the real key to this story, which is that early on, with the formation of Islamic militant extremist groups, the Western countries, Western powers, and also their intelligence apparatuses overseas have had a great influence in directing and communicating, and in fact deploying some of these forces around the world, all the way as far back as Bosnia. Before that, Afghanistan, obviously, but you know, in Bosnia and the Balkan War, and now we're seeing it just carry on. Now, the other thing is, look at how this operation in Mali came to be. The French were running point. Okay, Obama has just admitted over the weekend that the U.S. Was also providing technical support and combat aircraft support for France's rescue mission in Somalia, and this is against Al-Shabaab, which is the boogeyman Al-Qaeda linked group who has links with Western intelligence agencies south of that border as well, with what's been going on in Sudan, and you have further links in the south with Uganda. Now, this is and Britain supplied, I believe, transport aircrafts to support the French's operation. So this kind of remote control, where France, it's not politically feasible for the U.S. or Britain to run point, so France will step up, and then the U.S. and Britain will provide them with backup support wherever they need it. This is what you're looking at here, my friends, is a world police. This is a world army. This is effectively an extension of NATO, working far outside of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. But what it really is, what we're seeing underscores all this is a direct reflection of a U.S. foreign policy directive, which is outlined in words in its AFRICOM agenda. And in the AFRICOM documents, if you go in, you can read them online. They specifically have formed AFRICOM in order to evict Chinese interests from the continent of Africa. And Mali has a massive resources and minerals, rare earths, and also gold. And I might add that most of this gold is a Western, French and British owned gold industry in Mali that employs, according to Human Rights Watch, some 20,000 child workers. Okay, this is what our military is going in to protect, which is the corporate interests. That's what AFRICOM is about, because they are afraid that the Malians might get a better deal from the Chinese. Because at the moment, the European or the Anglo-Franco confab that runs the gold industry in Mali is only giving them 20%. And they take 80% back out of Africa. So could they get a better deal from the Chinese? Most likely they would. And the Chinese would probably build them nice infrastructure as well. So that's what AFRICOM is about. And now we're seeing France and Britain and other countries getting involved in the U.S. AFRICOM agenda. This is very clear what's happening.
Okay, Patrick, thank you very much for that. We will spend some more time on another occasion. We'll have a look at what you're talking about in more detail, because I know it's very important. We can just sum it up for viewers this afternoon that at the moment we're living in Britain. We haven't got a penny to repair the roads or look after people in hospitals or feed ourselves properly. But of course, David Cameron, William Hague, Tony Blair and the rest of the British warmongers seem to have unlimited funds for stoking up trouble overseas. So a cynical comment from me is totally meant. If we really want to understand why we're in such a shambles in Britain today, we've actually just got to watch what our politicians do and what they think about themselves. But I'm going to say we need to move on, because we've got Clive waiting patiently here to talk about his subject of food. We've just got a little bit of a lead in. We're going to take a break subject here. I've got a slide talking about the BBC, my favourite organisation at the moment. And here's the Telegraph reporting, well, this is a very distressing story. Radio 2 listeners were told they could get in contact with Sunday Love Songs programme at any time to leave heartfelt messages and romantic dedications, but instead, in a very cynical move, their messages were taken by an answering machine for use in future programmes. And this has now produced an investigation by the BBC, and the BBC has admitted that there were problems with accuracy when interacting with audiences, and noting it was essentially a problem of lack of clarity. Well, I think many people would say that with the BBC it's more mud than a lack of clarity, but it is interesting that the fact viewers couldn't get messages on for Sunday love songs has become a major national story. Meanwhile, the cover-up over BBC abuser Jimmy Savile still continues apace. So if we head towards your side, Clive, I'll just introduce this little subject to do with health, and from health we can jump to food, if that's okay. This is an article here, obviously again from the Telegraph, and a very interesting story. Recommend you have a look at it, because basically they're saying that the Mid Staffordshire Hospital, at the centre of terrible things, where between 600 and 1,200, so this is Britain in 2013, we are now in the pitiful state where between 600 and 1,200 patients are dying unnecessarily amid appalling standards of care, left in their own excrement, thirsty and without pain relief, while in A&E receptionists were left to decide which patients were urgent. And so what's going to happen is that ahead of the damning public inquiry, they're going to break up the hospital effectively. And of course the normal reason for doing that is so that you can say at the inquiry, well, of course we don't know who was in charge of which bit, because unfortunately the hospital's been reorganised. So I think that the Telegraph here is helping a massive cover-up over the terrible death of between 600 and 1,200 patients. And interestingly, the story does say that managers were said to be focusing on hitting targets and finances in order to achieve their foundation trust status, rather than focusing on the quality of care. If we dig into this a bit more, you may be interested here to see PricewaterhouseCoopers, the big national, international auditing company, is now heavily involved in helping to improve the NHS. Clearly we've just heard about how effective those improvements are. And here is one of their programs working on the clinical groups. This is the next phase of reorganisation of the NHS. And of course, alongside PricewaterhouseCoopers, we've got Common Purpose, Cumberledge Connection, the King's Fund, a very interesting and somewhat dodgy fund, I think, Proactive, and a legal company, Rag & Co., who those who have been investigating Department of Work and Pensions have seen before. So what sort of thing are these people up to? Well, this is a bit from the Pricewaterhouse web page. The transition to clinical commissioning gathering pace, a big issue for clinical commissioning groups. And very quickly it says that the key thing is leadership. We have to have the right leaders. Clinical commissioning groups should be led by a team of leaders rather than one individual. So we notice that any form of clinical language has gone out the window. We're talking about leaders. Here's Proactive. This is a shot from their website. Recommend you go and look at it yourself. It's fascinating. If we go and have a look at who these people are, the two lead players have experience in the theatre, and they seem to now also be trained in applied behavioural psychology, but they are able now to assist the NHS, and here's what they say. Proactive works with a network of over 60 associates from a wide range of disciplines and backgrounds to enable us to tailor our interventions to the needs of our clients. Our vision is to attract the best freelance writers, psychologists, business role players and other specialists in leadership and organisational development to work with us to create innovative, energising and highly effective interventions and training programmes. There's no mention of treating the sick, there's no mention of compassion. And our suggestion is this is why the NHS is rapidly becoming chaotic, because organisations such as Common Purpose and Proactive are in conducting the training. So this is Common Purpose boasting that their operations director, Fiona O'Connor, is also helping the NHS deliver emerging leaders and running workshops for their clinical commissioning groups. If you think it's restricted to common purpose, it's not, because the NHS is now running its own leadership academies. And if you look at the language of this leadership academy, you'll find that, again, they are talking about politics, they're talking about leadership training and psychology. They are not talking about how to give doctors and nurses the best possible education and working environment to then enable them to care for people. And I'll switch to the next slide because it'll introduce us very nicely. If we talk about caring people, this picture may not mean much to viewers at the moment, but the key point is that here we've got, Clive, a group of people who live to a very ripe old age. Is that correct?
Well, indeed. The Hunza were still are, to a large degree, the longest lived people on the planet. And I spent some time researching who lived the longest in the world. And you know, let's just go back to the NHS for a second, because when we go to a doctor, we go to have our health restored. Yep. You know, somehow we feel we've lost our health, so we go to a doctor believing that they know about health. But unfortunately, in the whole of the time they spend at medical school, they don't study health. It's not a subject they study. And if you ask a doctor, do you advise on health? What do you do? They'll say, well, we are disease managers. We manage your disease. So if we go to a doctor, they can offer us drugs, they can offer us surgery, they can offer us radiation, but there's nowhere in there that they're taught how to offer us Brussels sprouts or suggest that actually eating something might be good. And in fact, I've heard doctors say, well, eating has nothing to do with your health, when, well, in my book, you are what you eat. And what you ate yesterday is you today. You know, your brain is healthy if you ate good healthy food. If you ate donuts and hot dogs, it's probably not so great.
So you look at the medical profession at the moment, and you're saying that there's too much focus on disease and treating disease, and not enough focus on saying, well, why aren't people well in the first place? So the Hunzas here living to well over 100, you're saying to me, and they are healthy, simple diet, a good diet, and that's making the difference.
Well, it's a number of things. You know, the Hunza have been recorded living up to 130. Women have been giving birth to children in the past aged over 80. Right. Men working in the fields at 110. They're a healthy bunch. And how they did it was they quite high up in the mountains. Hunza is on the Pakistan-Afghanistan border, and they ate very sensibly. They didn't cook their food for huge lengths of time because a lot of the wood was down there a bit.
Short supply.
Yes. And so they had cooking pots that had very, very tight lids, and any juice in what they cooked, they ate it all. They didn't boil the vegetables and throw away the water. They ate everything. And they particularly had some interesting varieties of fruits up there. They had a lot of mulberries, they had a lot of apricots, and the Hunza apricots, if you haven't tried one, are particularly tasty, the nicest tasting apricots in the world. And what they did, when they'd finished eating the apricot, they would take the stone, crack it open and take out the kernel. And the kernel is full of vitamins, particularly vitamin B17. And there was a well-known film in the 70s by Edward Griffin, which suggested that apricot kernels were curing people's cancer. And there was a very, very big movement of people at that point taking apricot kernels because of its supposed cancer-curing properties. And the vitamin that's meant to do the job is vitamin B17.
Mm. Well, we're going to come on to the subject of cancer curing, because of course that's not only a very hot topic, but the government legislates say what we can and cannot talk about. But I'll just call it up. We should have it here somewhere. We've got your website. We'll just get that up on screen, and then hopefully you'll tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this. So this is Clive's website, Ancient Purity. So how did you get involved in this, and what led you to set up a website and start to talk to people about foods and good, healthy diets?
Well, when I was younger, I was in the business of ophthalmic optics, and I was merrily working away. We dealt with things like contact lenses and ophthalmic instruments and so on, when I started getting ill, and I started getting so ill that I had to give up driving the car, and I had to give up going to work, and within a very short time I found myself in hospital. And what had happened to me is that I'd had a huge dose of antibiotics from the doctors, and it seemed that that had wiped out my immune system, because I became type 1 diabetic. I became arthritic to such a degree that I looked like I was 90. All my joints were horribly deformed and swollen, and I couldn't lift a cup of tea, for instance. And after 3 weeks in hospital, the doctors said, well, we don't know the cause, we don't know the cure, but we can operate this afternoon if you want. So I got somebody to take me away from the hospital, because they clearly didn't have my interests at heart, I felt. And I was taken to a nutritionist, a man called Patrick Holford, who said, you're not low on drugs from the doctors, or you don't need surgery, you need minerals. And he gave me a stack full of minerals. I took them, and I got better. It took about a year. All the arthritic condition just went away. And after probably 2 years, I got all my strength back, and that was 25 years ago, and I've been fine ever since. And then shortly after that, my father's best friend told me that he'd got cancer for the second time, and after having a kidney removed the first time and going through chemotherapy and so on, he felt he couldn't go through the doctor's cures again. So he got in touch with the only man to win the Nobel Prize twice as an individual, who's Linus Pauling, managed to get him on the telephone. And Linus Pauling said, take 25 grams of vitamin C every day, build up slowly, and see what happens. So he not only cured his cancer completely by taking vitamin C, when he was on his way to the doctor's office, he got mugged, beat up all the people who were mugging him, went to the doctor, and the doctor said, well, we don't know what you've been doing, but the cancer has disappeared. He lived 25 years after that. Right. So just over about 15 years ago, I started studying health big time. I spent all day, every day, just researching, finding out from the people who had recovered from incurable diseases like I had, what did they do right? And then about 3 or 4 years ago, I realized that I had such powerful information that I really ought to start telling people about it. And now, these days, I give talks explaining my research, because people are dying through lack of knowledge.
Yeah. Well, before we came into the studio, you and I were having a chat about a few things, and we were working through certain topics. We covered salt. We were talking about margarine, and that was giving you it was informing me, but a little introductory part for the talk. So I think if we come into that, we're often seeing at the moment that we're being advised not to eat fatty acids, we're not to have salt, we're not to have this. Occasionally it goes the other way, so we're told we should be having our glasses of red wine, and then it's saying chocolate is good for you. I've seen that a couple of times, and then it's not good for you. So what's your view on, let's deal with some easy things. What salt or eating margarine versus butter? What's your view on what we should and shouldn't be doing?
Right. Well, essentially, if your ancestors recognised the food, it's going to be good. So your ancestors wouldn't have recognised ingredients that you can't read the words of. They wouldn't have really recognised processed foods. And it's the processing of foods that's doing the big damage. Let me give you an example which a lot of people wouldn't have thought of, perhaps, which is salt. Real salt is dried ocean. You know, you lay it out on a flat section of beach. The wind and the rain evaporate it, and it's wet. It never dries out properly. Even if you put it in the oven, if you took it out, it would be wet again in half an hour.
Because it's absorbing the moisture again.
Yeah. Particularly magnesium magnesium attracts water to it. So what the supermarkets do, what the salt manufacturers do, they assume you want dry salt. So they remove the magnesium so that it's now dry. But in removing the magnesium, they've removed a number of the other minerals. Then they think you want white salt, so they bleach it as well. Now, in that process, we have denatured the salt. Now, the Roman legionnaires knew all about salt. They paid their legionnaires in salt. The word salary comes from the word sal, for salt. And they also realised that the soldiers eating the rock salt, the inland salt, weren't as healthy as the ones who ate the sea salt. Now, as we know, inland salt, rock salt, is dry, which is indicative right away that the magnesium, or a large proportion of it, has been washed away.
Right.
So
we just had sorry to interject there, we had a slide here showing a couple of young lads dealing with sea salt. If we just bring that up on screen, if we can, Mike. Oh, so, thank you. Yeah. Is this is what's going on here? Is this proper sea salt that you're looking at, or?
It's hard to say exactly from that picture, but presumably yes. You know, what you do is you let the tide in, then you, on a flat piece of beach, you then block the tide off, so now you've got water on a flat area, and the sun and the wind just dries it out, and then they rake it up and put it into bags. So yeah. By the look of it, this probably is a...
I notice also the piles in the background have got a brownish cut. Presumably they're still damp, and then where it's dried off, I don't know, it's turned white. But I just pulled this off the internet to at least give viewers an idea of the different options here.
While it may look white, it's probably grey.
Okay. And can you buy this sort of salt then?
You can. There's a code name for it, in England anyway. It's called Celtic salt.
Right.
And Celtic salt is collected on the west coast of France, so it's dried Atlantic salt.
Right.
And I sell it on the website because it's very cheap, and it's one of the greatest medicines out. People don't realise how important salt is. You know, there's that old expression, he's worth his salt. Because if you're not worth your, or if you weren't worth your salt in the Middle Ages, that was you dying.
It's an amazing thing, isn't it? You're telling us here something very, very simple, that somebody was paid in salt, and now we've got to the stage where we're just being warned against it. And as you say, why is there the sudden change?
Well, when I became ill 25 years ago, I became diabetic, type 1 diabetic, and they told me, you have to give up salt or cut down dramatically. So I did exactly what they said, because at that point I thought doctors knew it all. And for the next 10 years I had terrible muscle cramps. I used to wake up in the middle of the night in great pain because my muscles were in spasm. And somebody said, oh, you realise you're just not eating enough salt. That's why you've got magnesium deficiency. So the salt that the doctors have been warning us about is, if you take the dried sea with all those elements, all the elements that are in it, 76 odd minerals, if you take 2 of those minerals out, just the sodium and the chloride, and you put together table salt, sodium chloride, all the other 94 minerals are missing, and they're all necessary. We need them all, and we need food in a perfect balance to be healthy. So there are many, many cases of people who started eating real dried ocean as their salt and found their blood pressure went to normal. If it was high, it went down. If it was low, it went up. Salt is essential.
And do you, can you talk to doctors about what you know and your experiences? What sort of reaction do you get if you try and talk to GPs about what you know?
Well, my own GP has been pretty open and is interested and keen to know things, but I've seen a lot of other GPs, talk to them, who really don't seem to be interested. They seem to believe that they know it all. I didn't hear it at medical school, it can't be correct. But unfortunately, the medical schools are teaching medicine which is mainly to do with drugs.
Yeah. And what about nutritionists? Because obviously that's a profession that's come in now. Do you feel that they are, try not to put the words in your mouth, but do you think that people who've now studied nutrition through the system, they've gone in through a university and done a degree in nutrition, do you think that that's equipping them with the same sort of knowledge that you've got?
Well, it's certainly not equipping them with the sort of knowledge that, say, a naturopath would have. You know, if I wanted an ideal doctor, I'd perhaps go to a doctor who is a GP and a naturopath as well. Naturopaths really understand the body in a type of detail that doctors don't. You know, doctors, on average, quite in some medical schools, they only do half a day on nutrition. And how much nutrition can you learn in half a day?
Not a lot, probably.
Not a lot.
Yeah.
And what if you're away that day?
Yeah.
I spoke to a trainee doctor who was about to pass their exams just in 6 weeks' time, and I asked them, what do you know about magnesium? And they said, well, nothing. We haven't been really taught anything about magnesium. And so I explained to her what I know about magnesium. Could I explain to you a little bit about magnesium?
Yeah, yeah. Well, viewers, you're not here for me, you're here for the viewers, so yeah.
Well, this is salt. This is real salt, rich in magnesium.
So this is what you call the Celtic?
Yeah, the Celtic salt. So this is
yeah.
dried ocean. Just try a tiny bit, because it tastes completely different to what we think salt tastes like. It's only sea. Now, if you took out the magnesium from the salt, you can put it into a liquid like this. And the best way to get magnesium into your body is actually just to spray it on. You can spray some on the skin and just rub it in. And like anything you put on the skin, it'll go straight in. Now, in China, they call magnesium the beauty mineral because it does fantastic things for skin. It makes skin very soft.
It's going to have to work very hard on me, so we'll see about
you
this.
Can have baths.
All right, okay.
But why it's so important is magnesium makes all the other minerals in the body work properly. Right. It makes, for instance, calcium work properly. Now, you go to a doctor and you say, well, I'm having problems with my bones or teeth. They'll say, oh, you need more calcium. But if you take more calcium and you're low on magnesium, having more calcium makes the problem worse, not better. Anybody who's got calcifications, as I did, when I had the arthritis, I had calcifications going on. The remedy for calcifications is magnesium. They work synergistically together. Calcium allows your muscles to contract. Magnesium allows your muscles to relax. Magnesium allows everything to relax, including you. So people who are tense, anxious, magnesium is often great for them. People having difficulty sleeping, often magnesium is great. But where magnesium is really important is for the people who have muscle cramps. Now, some people get muscle cramps, usually in the legs. Some people get twitchy eyes. Some people get hiccups. Those three are symptoms of a magnesium deficiency. So if you're one of the people getting one of those symptoms, you're at risk from a heart attack or a stroke. Because if you have a muscle cramp of your heart muscle, well, they call those heart attacks. You don't want those. Now, doctors in the emergency room often know about magnesium because emergency room doctors are aware that if, let's say, 4 patients get rushed into the emergency room having a stroke or a heart attack right there and then, now let's say 3 of those 4 would normally die. If they inject them with magnesium chloride, only 1 in 4 will die. Magnesium chloride stops strokes as you're having them, stops heart attacks as you're having them.
And you're saying in the medical profession people know this if they're working in A&E, but if they're
some emergency room doctors seem to be educated to it, but GPs generally just don't seem to really know about magnesium. You know, every university hospital teaching facility is different, so one may know more than another. But in general, I've found that doctors don't seem to understand magnesium, and it's vital because anybody who's having muscle cramps, they must increase their magnesium content. And there are other ways to do it, not just taking magnesium directly. The problem, why magnesium is, well, let me put it this way, 90% of us are low on magnesium, even if we're not getting the symptoms.
Where would we get magnesium from? Normally, we've talked about salt, but where else would
normally
we
get it from a lot of foods. Now, let's say you were to eat whole grains, like brown rice, or eat whole grain bread, for example. That would have lots of magnesium, assuming that the soil that you've grown those products in was rich in magnesium in the first place. Yep. Let's just assume it was. So now you've got, let's say, rice, rich in magnesium, and actually rice is full of all the minerals, pretty much. So let's say you now take the husk off the rice and you polish it, and now it's white rice. How much magnesium have you got left? 3%? 97%'s gone. Similarly, you take brown bread and you turn it to white bread. Again, 90-odd% of the magnesium is gone. So white flour that you've made pasta with, white flour that you've made pizza with, that you've made biscuits, cakes, white flour's got almost all the magnesium missing. So you've got a very unbalanced food.
So we've come back here to looking at the processing of food, so big manufacturing, big products. Instead of products being taken locally, they're being processed, and then we don't have the nutrients that we should have in them.
Yeah.
And you mentioned soya here. We've got a picture of not a very exciting picture, but it's a picture of soya growing. And this is something that you've got some reservations about. We're normally told this is good for us, get on to soya products instead of meat, or what do you think about soya?
Well, you know, there were two products brought out by Monsanto in America. One of them was margarine, which was originally grey. Well, margarine is grey. They colour it pink. They used to colour it pink in America the first 2 years. They also brought out soya. Now, many cultures have eaten soya over the years. The Chinese, the Koreans, the Japanese, they ate soya, but they always processed it in a sensible way. They fermented the soya to make soy sauce and so on, and they treated soya with, actually, funnily enough, magnesium chloride to make tofu. They always processed it, but Monsanto said it's fine for humans to eat. And in fact, it's a health food, it's really good for you. The problem is that it has an estrogen mimic in it. So when women in particular take soya, they're messing up their estrogen hormones. And all the other hormones now get messed up as a result. And all you've got to look is the most famous person who made soya products, the ones that are still in all the supermarkets now, was Linda McCartney. Now, she's dead. She died horribly young, and I fear she may have been eating the products. You know, if you're going to eat soya, unprocessed soya, you know, one meal a week, okay, maybe if you have to, but people, you know, a lot of vegetarians rely on soya as their alternative to meat and fish.
We're seeing more and more publicity, aren't we? And the main supermarkets now have sections where they've got soya products, and people are slowly but surely being directed to those sections, or they're becoming more attractive if you're going past them. So,
well, it's cheap. You know, soya is one of the cheapest things in the world now.
Right.
You know, most oil that says, let's say, vegetable oil, that's likely to be soya. They say that 98% of all soya is GM modified now. So how can you tell if your soya product is genetically modified or not? You can't trust it anymore. You don't know. But soya is getting really iniquitous. If you look at a packet of wholemeal bread, you know, Hovis or King's Mill or whatever they are, almost all of them now, instead of being 100% whole wheat like they used to, now it says 43% soya flour. And so our bread has been infiltrated with soya, and soya is just not a good human food, particularly for women.
Right. And what's another thing? We get onto fats and cholesterol and cut your cholesterol. There's some fairly powerful adverts going on TV at the moment, I think. Where have I been hearing? I've been hearing it on Classic FM, and there's a regular advert coming up where they're saying, this is Brenda, she's 59 years old, and she's been to the doctor, her cholesterol too high, she's now exercising, and they're recommending a margarine. But the whole objective is that she's cutting out fatty acids.
Well, you know, they call them essential fatty acids,
right, okay.
And whenever they use the word essential, they're essential amino acids, they're essential vitamins. That means you can't make them, you've got to get them from outside. Now, if you took your brain, for example, your brain should be somewhere between 70 and 80% water. And depending on how hydrated you are, depends how close whether you've achieved that or not. But if you take the water away and you're left with the dry weight of the brain, it's mainly cholesterol. Your brain is made of cholesterols and fats. So also the membrane of all your cells, you know, you've got 50 to 100 trillion cells in your body, they all contain cholesterol. Now, so what if you go on a low cholesterol diet? And remember, our ancestors never ate low cholesterol. Our ancestors ate all the rich foods. You know, we're told, let's say milk, for example, we're told skimmed milk is good. However, the whole word, the cream, might be a giveaway that actually it's the full-fat cream that's good. You know, the reason it's called the cream is it's the best. and it still is, despite what they're telling us. So I've had people who've, after coming to my talks, because I give talks explaining this sort of stuff, I usually suggest that anybody who's got Alzheimer's should start eating high cholesterol food, particularly coconut oil. Now, I recommend that everybody with Alzheimer's eats 6 tablespoonfuls of coconut oil every day if they can possibly do it. And it might sound a lot, but you can cook with it. It's the only oil that doesn't degrade with heat. Very, very important to understand that. You can cook with it and it won't degrade. You can eat it straight off the spoon if you happen to like the taste of it. You could add it to soups, you could add it to stews, you could add it to most things. It's quite versatile. And I've had people say things like this: well, I couldn't get my mum to eat 6 tablespoonfuls. It was too much, but I could persuade her to eat 3 or 4. And I've had people say, well, look, for the last 2 years, it's been impossible for me to speak on the phone to my mum. She just can't. Alzheimer's is too bad. 6 weeks on coconut oil, she's speaking on the phone to mum again. That's reversing 2 years of Alzheimer's, if I'm calculating this right, in 6 weeks.
Yeah.
That's extraordinary.
If I was challenging here and say, you are putting out a lot of information about this, and I know there are many, many other people now starting to challenge everything that's going on about what we're being advised to eat or not eat. Organisation like the Alzheimer's Society, are they picking up on these things, or are they too frightened? Are they too much in the mould to go near it? Do you know whether they're starting to look at alternative remedies?
Well, the problems with charities is that they're self-interested. You know, if they cure everybody, they haven't got a job anymore. I went into my local Alzheimer's Society and said, coconut oil, check it out. It's on YouTube. You put Alzheimer's and coconut oil onto YouTube, dozens and dozens of people who'll stand up and said, it was horrible when I had Alzheimer's. I couldn't think straight, and now I can. I mean, all the evidence is there. You see, we've been told by the medical profession that all this medical information is terribly complicated. You've got to go to university for 6 years to study it, and then it takes a long time. But what if it's more simple than that? What if, actually, you can go onto Google, and within an hour, you can understand what I'm saying about cholesterol, because it wouldn't take more than an hour for you to realize, yes, actually my brain is made of cholesterol. And then go onto YouTube and see all the people standing up. And there are doctors there saying they're using it. We have to realize we need to take our power back. We're not stupid. This information isn't complex.
On the basis that generations and families were able to teach each other what was the right thing to eat and how to cook it and how to be safe and which mushroom to pick. We've been taught all that, and it's probably in our genes as well as to how to do it. Now all of a sudden we've got a state telling us. Is this the issue? Is something happening here where we've got the state now starting to intervene?
Well, the state's definitely intervening. I'm hearing cases of people who say, well, you know, my son, daughter has got cancer, and I want to treat it with alternative treatments. And I'm hearing that the NHS, the doctors have the power to say, well, you're clearly mentally unstable if you don't want your children to have chemotherapy, and therefore we're going to take your children away and give them chemotherapy whether you like it or not, which is barbaric, because they're assuming that they're right. And anybody who looks into natural cures for cancer, for instance, will see that there are an awful lot of people out there, hundreds of thousands, who are on the internet saying, I had cancer, here are the pictures, isn't it horrible, now I'm fine.
Yeah. Well, we just very quickly took slide off the internet here. This is, for those people who don't know, the Cancer Act 1939. It's a pretty draconian act. No person shall take any part in the publication of any advertisement containing an offer to treat any person for cancer, or to prescribe any remedy therefore, or to give any advice in connection with the treatment. And then it goes on to say that you're going to be fined and imprisoned. So it's very draconian. You're not allowed to offer, none of us are allowed to offer cancer treatment. The only people who can talk about this apparently are the big pharmaceuticals. And as you say, if you investigate yourself, the internet is a wonderful vehicle in many ways, because we can see people speaking out on this issue. So on this programme, what can we say? We've just shown you what the law says. It's up to you to do your research and decide what you feel is beneficial to you and why. But there's lots of information out there. You mentioned iodine, I think, at one point, and saying how that had also been used to, as a cure for various things.
Well, doctors 100 years ago, if they couldn't figure out what to do, it was common practice to give iodine.
Right.
You know, if you couldn't work it out, iodine almost always works. And iodine's ludicrously cheap. I mean, I've got a bottle of it here.
Well, I was going to. You've got a bottle. I've got a slide here of a tiny bit of iodine on with its wonderful purpley colour.
So a tiny bottle. This tiny bottle here, it's only 50 ml. There's enough in there for 16 months.
Right.
And it's ridiculously cheap. You know, a year's supply is about £15.
Right.
It's very, very cheap.
And what would this be doing for you?
Well, what iodine does is it makes the thyroid work properly. There is a thyroid epidemic out there. Lots of people are on thyroxine from the doctors. But 100 years ago, 80 years ago, the doctors, before thyroxine, used to give you iodine. And how they'd know how much to give and when to stop was they'd take your temperature. If you take your temperature about 3-5 minutes after you've got out of bed, after you've sort of shaken off the heat of the bed, take your temperature. If it's 1 degree lower than normal, then that's indicative you've got a thyroid problem. The thyroid regulates your body temperature. So people who've got very cold hands and feet, chances are they may have a low thyroid function. People who are losing the outside of their eyebrows, that's low iodine. The thing about iodine, why everybody's low on it, virtually everybody in the country is low on iodine right now, is because of the chlorine and the fluoride and the bromine that we're subjected to.
Right.
What's happened is we're bathing every day in chlorine, and the chlorine is a smaller atomic size than iodine. So chlorine gets in straight through the skin. So when you're bathing or having a shower, it goes straight in and it displaces iodine. So now your hormones are being made of chlorine instead of iodine. Brush your teeth in fluoride, same thing happens. You're now making fluoride-based hormones. Let me give you a quick history of halogens. Okay, World War I, they gave the troops bromine in their tea to make them docile and stop them getting horny. The poison gas of choice in World War I was chlorine. They gassed you with chlorine. Then in World War II, all the concentration camp victims were fed fluoride because fluoride is tasteless, odorless, colourless, and makes you docile. So there's no surprise that they want to put it in the water supply. Already are putting it in the water supply in some cases. If you've got fluoride in your water supply and want to get it out, take a little bit of boron, otherwise known as borax, very cheap, and put a little pinch in the water, or more than a pinch, and it will neutralise fluoride. The best thing to do is to make sure you filter all your water. If you haven't got a filter jug, at the very least, you want to not only be filtering the water that you drink or make tea with, but you don't want to be boiling your vegetables in chlorinated water because you're filling your kitchen with chlorine gas.
Yeah,
it's just
well,
not
I
sensible.
mentioned something to you earlier this morning, which is something I've noticed. I've got 2 dogs, and in the last, I'd say in the last year in particular, the dogs, they've always got a bowl of fresh water on the kitchen floor, but now they are there at the back door. They want to go out and drink rainwater, so they will drink the tap water. And I've never noticed this before, but it's it seemed to particularly started in the last year. So those dogs, for whatever reason, are now saying, I'd rather go and drink the rainwater than the tap water. Tap water where I live, I have to say, tastes to me anyway a lot better than it does in this office complex. So the issue of the water and what's being done with the water, a lot of people are beginning to pick up on this.
Well, we are water. We are mainly water. Yeah. And if you look at water in detail, you've got H2O, hydrogen and oxygen. Now, hydrogen is the smallest atom that exists. It's number 1 on the periodic table. And they reckon we have something like 4,000 quadrillion atoms in our body, and most of them are hydrogen. So the water that we ingest is us.
Right.
And let me just talk just a tiny bit more about iodine for a minute to put it in perspective. If you're low on iodine, you'll have a low IQ. If a woman is low on iodine, she gives birth to a child, that child will also have a low IQ because she was low on iodine. If the woman is really low on iodine, clinically low, the doctors have a term for it, the child will be born a cretin, mentally deficient. That's how important iodine is. People who have brain fog, very often it'll lift once they get enough iodine.
Right.
Super important. So with water, the quality of the water is huge. You know, what you did yesterday is who you are today. And if you drink polluted water, and it is so polluted these days if you're unlucky.
Depending which part of the country you're in and what they're actually doing with the water. The salt's sitting there. We're talking water. You were telling me earlier on about a doctor in Iran who was doing some amazing stuff. Tell us a bit of that. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a picture of him, but I found the internet mentioned him by name.
Yeah, it's Dr. Batman Gelig, and people call him Dr. Batman.
Yeah.
And his story is fantastic, I think. He got arrested when the Ayatollah came into power and got thrown into the nastiest jail in Tehran. And the jail had been built for something like 800 people, and it had 7,000 in there. And with that level of overcrowding, they were ill. He reckoned that 50% of the inmates were ill with something, usually stomach bugs. Anyway, he had no medicines. He was the only doctor there. And people came to him right away saying, what do I do? I'm ill. And he had only 2 things to offer, no medicines at all. Right. He had real salt, proper salt, and he also had very, very good quality water. That's what the prison had. And lacking anything else to do, he was desperate. He had to say something to these poor guys. So he said, drink as much water as you can. Eat loads of salt with everything. And people started getting better. People with high blood pressure found their blood pressure normalized and so on. So after 15 months in the jail, they said, we made a mistake, you can go. And he said, well, look, I'm doing the biggest medical research that I could ever do in my life. Do you mind if I stay for another 6 months and finish it? They let him stay in jail for 6 months. Now if you go onto his website, there are tens of thousands of people saying, you were right, I was dehydrated. That was the whole problem, and I wasn't eating enough salt.
So the primary focus of his website now is, are you sufficiently hydrated? Are you drinking enough?
Exactly, and he's written several books. One of them is called The Body's Hidden Cries for Water.
Right.
He's written on The Body's Many Cries for Water. And we are dehydrated generally. Most of us are. By the time you get thirsty, you're already dehydrated. You want to be drinking enough, really, so you never get thirsty. But the higher quality of the water, the less you need to drink. And there are certain things you can do to water to improve its quality dramatically.
Right, okay.
Let me tell you what's...
Take us through those, yeah.
Yes. For instance, this isn't water, but if it were, just by spinning it round like this, not spraying it all over the studio, spinning it round, you'd get a vortex there. Just spinning it improves the energetic quality of the water, and that side of it's very important. Other ways to improve water, apart from filtering it, you can use a device like this, which is an ozone generator. Now, with an ozone generator, you get a glass of water here. Now, let's say this is the worst water in the world. It's got old antibiotics in it, it's got birth control pills, it's got chlorine, you name it. You pop this little air bubbler in here, and you turn this on. If I quickly plug it in, I'll just demonstrate it. Take into that for me. I'm going to pull myself away from the plug, so I can't.
We're just
anyway.
laughing because the button's green, which is going to...
oh, I see, yes.
So something unique is happening here. It's okay, doesn't worry. Yeah.
Anyway, if we could turn it on, you'd see bubbles coming through, which is ozone. Ozone is O3, oxygen 3, just like the ozone layer. And put it on for 2 seconds, it neutralizes it. There's a great video on YouTube where they have a goldfish in a bowl swimming around happily. They take a little drop of pesticide and drop it in the bowl, in a second the fish is upside down dead. They put the ozone generator in it, turn it on, 1 microsecond, and now suddenly the goldfish is up and swimming around again.
Right.
Ozone will neutralise toxins and poisons instantly.
Right.
And
we're not suggesting people poison a poor goldfish, but
I wouldn't suggest that, no.
Yeah.
But let me just tell you something about ozone. While you can purify water with it, let's say you've got some fruits and vegetables from a supermarket. We'll call that supermarket Deathco. So you've got some Deathco fruits and vegetables.
Right.
Now, you know they've been sprayed with fungicides, pesticides, whatever. So you put them in a bowl of water, you put the ozone generator on, and you bubble some ozone through the vegetables. All the chemicals that are on the outside will now be neutralized. So you can essentially turn non-organic vegetables organic. Now, they may still be missing all the minerals, but you can
cleaning them.
You can clean them.
Yeah.
There are other ways to clean them. If you can't afford an ozone generator, vinegar, apple cider vinegar works very well.
Right.
Just scrub them. But remember that just washing vegetables and fruits to get those chemicals off isn't enough, because they've sprayed on water-resistant chemicals. They don't want the rain washing them off. So if they have been sprayed, just washing is unlikely to get most of the bad stuff off. You've got to do more.
Well, we're in an amazing situation here, aren't we? We're round the date home, 2013. We're supposedly in a well-developed society and economy, and we're coming out with ways that we've got to deal with our food in order to eat properly. Why do you think this has come about?
Well, the main reason is the damage they've done to the soil. Now, I used to be an organic farmer, and they came to me when I wanted my land certified organic. You didn't used to have to certify land organic. It was assumed that it all was, unless you'd poisoned it.
Yep.
But they came to me and said, okay, we're going to certify you. And I said, well, what will it involve? And they said, well, look, if you haven't put chemicals on for 3 years, chances are your soil will be good and we'll pass you. If we still find residues of poisons, wait another 2 years, so 5 years have now elapsed, and then we'll almost definitely pass you. But I know that if you've killed the land with chemicals for a long time, for decades, it could take hundreds of years for the soil to recover. Because when I was young, when they ploughed the field, I noticed a couple of things. One is thousands of birds of all different species would come because you were turning over all the worms and things. You look at a field these days, some fields have no birds at all when they plough it, some have some seagulls, some have a few crows, but it's not the flocks of birds that there were just a few years ago. And also, soil used to be this very dark brown colour. Now I'm seeing soils at the end of harvest time, they're sort of grey and incredibly light brown. Now, if soils have a high mineral content, they're going to be dark, rich, filled with humus, right? But these days, the soils are empty, so you plant vegetables and grow them on these empty soils. They put NPK, nitrates, phosphorus, potassium, on the soil, because just those 3 minerals are enough to allow plants to grow, but they can be empty of all the other minerals. Let me give you an example. In Jamaica, they have an incredibly high rate of arthritis. In Israel, they have almost no arthritis. If you know any Israelis, ask them, do you know anybody in your country who's got arthritis? It's really surprising. They usually say, no, I don't know anybody who's got arthritis. Now, that doesn't happen in England, and it certainly doesn't happen in Jamaica. In Jamaica, what happened is, when they planted the island up with sugarcane, the sugarcane stripped a lot of minerals out. Monoculture of sugarcane for a long time, it strips one particular mineral out, boron. So in Jamaica, there's very little boron left in the soil. So then when sugar beet took over and they started planting vegetables where the sugarcane had been, they grew vegetables with low boron. And without boron, you get arthritis. The reason that Israel has so little arthritis is it has the highest rate of boron of any soil in the world. So of course they don't get arthritis. People don't know that.
Does the NHS, in the broadest sense, do they do any research into this sort of stuff, or is it just completely ignored?
Well, unfortunately, what the NHS don't appear to study are 2 subjects. They don't study causes and they don't study cures. I mean, can you think of a cure for anything that the pharmaceutical industry has cured ever? You think of one cure? They say we're spending, they spent 40 billion on cancer just in the first 20 years of cancer, the war against cancer. Mm. They haven't cured it. They don't even know what the cause is. Mm. But the weird thing is that I can tell you what the causes of cancer are. It's been known. They won Nobel Prizes for it. Back in 1931, Otto Warburg, who was a Nobel Prize winner, his work was proving that if you took a normal cell and you deprived it of enough oxygen, it became cancerous to survive. So a normal cell is aerobic, it breathes oxygen. You starve a cell of oxygen, it changes its metabolism, so now it's burning glucose instead, and that's what we call a cancerous cell. Right. So to say that the cause of cancer isn't known isn't quite right. Well, how about the Nobel Prize in 1931? Also in 1931, there was a French doctor who presented 30 years of studying cancer in Egypt and the rest of Europe. Right. And what he found was that the Egyptians only had 1/10 of the cancer rate of Europeans and Americans. This was from 1900 through to 1931. But if you took an Egyptian and you moved them to, say, Germany, within 2 years, they would have raised their cancer rate 10 times and now have the same rate as Germany.
So what's this pointing at? Environment is the key thing.
Well, he spent 30 years. Is it the fact that they're Egyptian? Is it the fact that they're in Egypt? What is it? And he worked out it was magnesium in the soil. That by that time, in Egypt, they still weren't using chemicals hardly at all, but in all of Europe and America, they were beginning to use chemicals. And just in that short period of time, they'd taken the magnesium out of the soil sufficiently to have raised cancer by a factor of 10. Right. You know, the doctors will say, well, we don't know about cancer, but we think it's probably genetic. But 100 years ago, 3% of the population got cancer. Now it's about 50%. How can it be genetic? It's got to be environmental.
And what happened to that research? You're saying that was Nobel quality research. What's actually happened to that?
Well, they don't teach it at medical school. That's the problem. It's not that the information is all there. It's not covered up. But they don't teach this type of information at medical school. They teach how to irradiate, how to do surgery, and how to push drugs.
Yeah. Now, just keep an eye on the clock. We've got seven minutes here. You mentioned sugar earlier on, or I mentioned sugar, and you twitched. What do you feel about sugar?
Even if it says raw and unrefined, you don't want to eat it. Look, if you want something sweet, go into the supermarket, buy xylitol, Xylitol, xylitol. It's from birch trees. It's a natural product. Diabetics can pretty much eat it. It's very, very safe for everybody except dogs. You mustn't give it to your dogs, just like you mustn't give them chocolate or mushrooms. Yeah, yeah. But the thing I'd really like to talk about, I'd just like to get back to the minerals for a bit, and I'd like to tell you about this stuff. This stuff is fulvic minerals, Fulvic, fulvic. Now, let's say that we cast time back, and now we're in the forest. We've always lived in the forest, we know where everything is, and all life in the forest has gone into the soil, right? Every insect, every leaf, every animal, it's all died and gone round and round forever. So if you could take the soil, pour some water on it, and strain that muddy water off, you'd have the perfect mineral supplement. There's nothing better than what's coming out of the soil. So there are a few places in the planet where, by geological accident, rainforests have got crushed. You know, sometimes it seems, they say it makes coal, sometimes diamonds, sometimes oil, and sometimes you can get a mineral supplement that is so powerful that there's enough in here for 4 months, for instance. Now, so this is every mineral known to man, every rare earth, every amino acid, there's everything in here, and it's so strong it's 4 months worth. Now, the first day I tried this, I woke up the next morning and I felt different. I felt completely different. And after a couple of weeks taking it every day, how I felt different was that my body had shed 20 years in age as far as the way I felt. I felt so great. Any stiffness or any, you know, it had just gone.
Right, now, that's just reminded me, because you also mentioned DNA, didn't you? You were talking about DNA tests now starting to be able to identify something that we couldn't a few years ago.
This is incredible. 2 things have happened recently that are mind-blowing. In 2008, the Nobel Prize was won by 3 people for the discovery of telomeres. Telomeres are the strands at the end of your DNA, and they can now measure how those telomeres are getting depleted. Once you run out of telomeres, the cells die. So it's very important. You want to slow down the loss of telomeres.
Right.
A sudden stress, a shock, will slow it down. But now they can measure it. They started looking at the Chinese herbs that they always claimed were good for longevity, like ginseng. They started working with astragalus. It's a root, also known for longevity. And they found now a supplement that you can take that makes your cells grow younger. So this is extraordinary. This has never happened in human history. People on a cellular level are getting younger. That means you might be 50, but you can do the stuff you used to do at 30. There's a YouTube video called How to Live to 150 and Beyond. That's a good place to start to learn about it. We're just redoing our website, and probably in a week or two we'll have these new products on, because there are a couple of products that completely change the game. Completely. You can reverse cellular aging. That means reversing disease, reversing how you feel, being fitter again. And there's another thing, a test, it's called Smart DNA, and I offer this test. They can now sequence your genome and work out who you are exactly. It cost 20 billion, I think, to sequence a genome 20 years ago. Now it's £700. What you get with that information is you know exactly who you are. Some people, let's say, might not get on with a certain product. It might be an oil, it might be a mineral, it might be a vitamin, it might be a type of food. Whereas before, it was just guesswork, trial and error to see whether you got on well with it or not. Now, you can get an 80-page report which tells you exactly what you can and can't do to be well. So you can avoid all those possible diseases that you could have had. You can avoid the lot, as far as we can see. It totally changes everything.
Yeah. This is a bit of a low fast ball, but Codex Alimentarius. Can you comment on that at all and just explain it with an eye on the clock for viewers what that is?
Well, Codex is supposed to make you safe by legislating what foods you can have, how much you can have of them, and so on. So what they've done now, the Europeans, you might have heard this, that let's say I was bottling water. Okay, now if I had the temerity to suggest that water could hydrate you, to suggest that this was wet in some way, I could get 2 years in jail for claiming that as a health claim if I wrote it on the bottle or put it on my advert, because there's never been a double-blind test to prove that water is hydrating. Now, if you were to do a double-blind test, what would you compare water against? You'd know which. You can't do a double-blind test for a lot of products because you'd tell by the taste, by the look of it, whatever. Blindfolding isn't going to help you. What Codex is doing is it's codifying law, whereas English law was you can do anything you like unless it's forbidden. Codex is Napoleonic law, where you can do nothing unless it's specifically allowed. So they're saying, oh, this might be dangerous, so you can't have it. But if we spend £1 million testing it to prove it's safe, then we might be able to do it. But then you say, well, look, here's a Chinese herb. This has been around for 3,000 years. They were writing about it in China 3,000 years ago. Can I have that? Codex will say no, because it hasn't been proven in England.
So this is big state prescription of absolutely what we can eat and the minerals and supplements that we can and cannot eat.
Bizarre as it might sound, they don't seem to want us to be well.
Right. Well, I was going to say we've got a minute to go, and I'll do this for you, really, but for us it's very clear that we are being attacked by our own government, and that includes the foods that we eat. These people do not want us to be well. That's the conclusion that we've come to, and the information that you're putting across about what we can and should be eating, I think, is absolutely fascinating. So if you've been with us today and you want to investigate more, this is Clive's site. We just put it up very quickly. Have a look and see what he's saying. Do your own research, try it for yourself. But we're going to say thank you very much for joining us, Clive, and well, we hope to have you back again.
Good, thank you very much.
Thank you.